From gardening to animals to extreme renovations, welcome to Homesteading at College Hill Farm. Welcome back to College Hill Farm. Today we're continuing our series on casual and complementary prepping. Today we're talking about chickens. Well, if you look at where we've been and where we're going, we have talked about pigs on the homestead. We've talked about sheep and goats. We've talked about the garden. But in order to have a completely diverse homestead so that you can prepare for this didn't do well or that didn't do well, you have to have a completely diverse homestead. So with that in mind, today we're going to talk about the lowly chicken. Back in the early 1900s, Appalachia was just emerging into the coal industry. But prior to that, it had been a hardscrabble lifestyle where almost everybody had a homestead where they used to farm things called new grounds. So what happened in the 1900s was coal mining came to Appalachia. Well, when coal mining came, so did the people who wrote about coal mining. One author came through and happened to notice that he heard more roosters in Appalachia than he had heard in his entire career anywhere else. Because chickens are so easy to raise, everybody had some. They had them in their farms, they had them beside their homes. You know, if they just had 4 or 5 chickens, that gave them a whole lot of eggs. Even my grandfather was a coal miner, my dad was a coal miner, my brother was a coal miner. When we look at that stuff, they raised chickens. Paul had a little homestead. He raised pigs and chickens. As a matter of fact, he bought 100 diddles a year, baby chickens. 100. And plus he had 2 or 3 hens that would sit on a clutch of eggs. So at the end of the year, he wound up putting like 50 bakers in the oven, or in the freezer, not the oven, in the freezer. And he put 50 fryers in the freezer, which was the cockerels from the 100 to 120 chicks that he had. So let's see what the lowly chicken can do for us. So now let's talk about chickens. Well, chickens are all the same species, from the egg layers to the fancies to those Dr. Seuss looking chickens. They're all descended from the red jungle fowl. Of course, I don't have a picture of those because I don't live nowhere around that. But they're all descended from red jungle fowl and all the same species, much like dogs. But before they were eaten by us, they were eaten by everything else in the jungle. The main predators for chickens are canids, foxes, dogs, and coyotes, felines, cats, and bobcats. Yes, your little house cat is a killer. Raptors, owls, hawks, eagles, like that. And finally, raccoons, minks, weasels, and the lowly possum. And you have to design a coop in order to keep those buggers out, because if you don't, you won't have any chickens. And everybody who raises chickens has to come to that realization. Today, we're going to concern ourselves with sustainability. So if you look at sustainability on a scale, you really want to raise a chicken that's not just designed to give you eggs, but designed to give you eggs and meat both. Or in other words, what we call a dual purpose chicken, not a Franken chicken. You know, there are some Cornish rocks and things that are just designed to give you meat in 8 weeks, and that's what you get. Well, that's not what you can be sustainable with. Those chickens can't even breed. So you have to stick with a dual purpose bird. And dual purpose birds are going to give you about 3 eggs a week apiece. Well, you bring home those little fur balls, and the next thing you know, you've got them raised up and you're starting to get eggs. Well, let's talk about eggs for a minute. Eggs are a wonderful thing given to you by chickens, and an egg is worth about 78 calories. And continuing on with thoughts about sustainability, you might have to think about making sure that you have a breed of chicken that will go broody. That's a chicken that will sit on a clutch of eggs and bring them up until they hatch. Or you might want to consider investing in an incubator where you can hatch 50 or 60 or 100 eggs at once. So that's one of the things that you're going to have to consider. Muscovy ducks are probably the best hatchers, but that's something subject for another video. When we look at the dual purpose chickens, we want to think about their carcass weight versus their meat. A dual purpose chicken, a good example is when you kill a dual purpose chicken, about 70% of that is going to be the carcass. That's after you've taken out off the head and taken out the guts and took the feathers off. But then only about 45% of that is actual meat. So you have to base everything on that. Now, breast meat is 749 calories a pound. Leg meat is 948 calories a pound. So if we just average everything out for a chicken, a whole live chicken, it averages out to about 850 calories per pound of meat. Okay, you see what the calories are listed, and some of you will say, well, now wait a minute, chicken breasts don't have that many calories. Well, it does if you leave the skin and the fat on it. Homesteaders need that fat. We've discussed this before when we talked about pigs, and milk is fat mainly. So when we look at the three, talking about pigs, goats, and chickens, fat's good. It's added calories. When you're trying to be sustainable, fat is good. Let me say that again. When you're trying to be sustainable, fat is good. So if we look at those chickens, what you're going to wind up with, we're going to say that it's about 850 calories. That's average between the dark meat and the white meat and the liver and all that stuff. Then a chicken, when you're processing it, once you've got a carcass, that means the guts are out, you've got the liver separated, the head's off, the feathers are off, the feet are cut off. Once you've got a carcass, what you've got is something that's going to yield you about 45% meat. The rest of it will be bone and sinew and stuff that you can't eat. So let's take and talk about the kind of birds that we want to raise. Well, we don't want to raise egg layers because all they're good for is eggs. Their carcass is real tiny and just wouldn't give you much. We want to raise a dual purpose bird. A bird that's going to give you both meat and eggs. Dual purpose birds are the ones like the Buff Orpingtons, the Barred Rocks, those kind of birds. They generally give you about 3 eggs a week. They will give you a 4-pound fryer carcass and an 8-pound baker carcass. So they're good. They will generally, a chicken will lay real good from about a little past 6 months all the way up to 2.5 to 3 years. But once they hit that 3-year mark, chicken's egg production goes way down. So the way Paul did it, he raised his young chickens in a brooder house. Then he kept his 6-month to 1.5-year olds in one house, his 1.5 to 2.5s in one house, and then his anything older than 2.5 he put in another house. And when their egg production dropped, generally about November, he'd put them all in the freezer, and they yielded about an 8-pound bird. Well, in the springtime, he would raise those chicks up in the brooder house till they were about 6 months old. Then they were straight run chicks, either by chickens sitting on them, or he bought them from Sears and Roebuck as straight run chicks. And so what you get with straight runs is you get about 50% roosters and 50% hens. Well, what he did was he took in about 30 weeks, he took and culled all the cockerels, the roosters, the young roosters. He culled all the cockerels and made frying chickens out of them. So he had about 50 or a little more for frying chickens, and then he had 50 bakers. So he had 100 chickens in a freezer. So for that, if we look at it and think about the 45% yield, a 4-pound fryer then is only going to give us 1.5 pounds of usable meat, 1.5 pounds of usable meat. Well, at 850 calories a pound, that winds up to be 1,530 calories for a frying chicken. One frying chicken, 1,530 calories. Then those bakers, he dressed those out, and they dressed out to around 8 pounds. Some a little more, some a little less, but the average probably about 8 pounds. And they yield 4.6 pounds of meat. Okay, seeing where we're going? So that gave us somewhere around 3,060 calories in a bacon chicken. 3,060 calories. So it's basically double a frying chicken, but the weight was double. Does that make sense? All right. Now, let's think about how you want to do your homestead and how many chickens you're going to raise. Let's say that each year you're going to raise 30 chicks. I'm not talking about doing a lot. 30 baby chickens is not a big deal to raise. 30 chicks, but as you do that for 4 years, what you're going to wind up with, you're going to cull 15 out of the 30, because 15 of them are going to be roosters, probably, maybe even more, or maybe a little less, but the average is going to be about 50-50. So you're going to cull the roosters at 6 months. You're going to get 15 of those, and then in the 4th year of raising these things, the third to 4th year, you're going to have bacon hens at the end. So you're going to have about 15 of those if you're successful at raising them and don't let the predators get them. So if we consider it that way, on your homestead, let's say you had 15 fryers and 15 bakers. So the fryers would yield you 22,950 calories. The bakers would yield you 45,900 calories. That's pretty good. 15 times 3,060, and then 15 times 1,530. So we know how many calories we've got from those. Now let's talk about where the real calories are. The real calories from a chicken, just like goats, just like pigs, the real calories aren't in the meat. They're in the fat. In goats, the real calories aren't in the meat. It's in the milk. So with chickens, the real calories aren't in the meat. So where do those calories come from? Well, they come from eggs. So you've got these chickens, and each chicken is going to give you, you've got 30 chickens. You know, we're talking about a 4-year span here. You've got 30 chickens that are a year and a half, up to a year and a half old, or 15, and then you've got 15 that are a year and a half to 2.5. So you've got these 30 chickens, and they're going to give you about 3 eggs a week. But they're not going to do that all year. About 42 weeks, you're going to average that 3 eggs a week. So if we do that, that's 90 eggs a week times 42. So those chickens are going to give you 3,780 eggs. Now that might seem like a lot. That's 315 dozen. What are you going to do with all those? Well, you might barter them. You might sell them. You might feed them to the pigs. They're great protein supplements for your livestock. So even for the chickens themselves, they're a good protein supplement. So you've got these eggs, and they're worth about 78 calories a piece. So you've got 3,780 of them a year. That comes out to 294,840 calories. Let me say that again. 294,840 calories. Wow, that's a lot more than you're ever going to get from the meat. So, let's compare and see where we're at. What did we get from raising 30 chicks a year? As a matter of fact, you can get 30 chicks off of 2 loads under a hen. So I'm not talking about nothing that can't be done very sustainably, even without electricity. A hen can sit on 30 chicks on 15 without too much problem if we're talking about a good dual purpose hen. So let's look at what we can come up with. You'd have 3 of them and do the 30 between them, 10 eggs apiece. They'd probably do just fine. So let's look at what we got. For our fryers, we got 22,950 calories. For our bakers, we got 45,900 calories. And then for the eggs that they delivered to us, it's 294,840 calories. So for just doing these 30 diddles a year, and then keeping the remainder until the 3rd year when you cook them, when you cull them for bacon, you're looking at 363,690 calories a year. That's pretty doggone good. It's not as much as the goats we talked about. It's not as much as the pigs we talked about, but it's a considerable amount. Now, how does that stack up compared? Well, let's look at the numbers. In our garden, we had 488,137 calories from our entire garden. And I'll put a link to the video about those. You can watch where we talk about each one of these. I'll put a link up here. The pigs yielded 566,100 calories. The goats and sheep yielded 606,888 calories. And now, with the chickens, we have 363,690 calories. For a grand total of 2,024,000 calories and 815 calories total on our homestead. Now, it took 460,000 for 2 people for a year. So we're over that, but we're not over it that much when you consider some of the eggs will go back into your pigs. Some of the milk will go back into your pigs. You know, you're going to use that around. Remember, a pig eats as much as a human. So that's where we're at. So if we look at this, chickens can be a valuable asset on your homestead. We're tremendously over. But what we want to consider is that a completely diverse homestead is the best buffer against hunger. Let me say that again. A completely diverse homestead is the best buffer against hunger. So if we think about that and we think about what's required, we need to continue with the series to look at all the other creatures that are typically raised on a homestead. We'll even consider some of those things that are hunted. But for right now, we're going to confine ourselves to those things that we raise on our homestead. So our next video is probably going to look at turkeys, ducks, geese, peafowl, guineas, that kind of thing. And then after that, we'll do cattle. Then we're going to do a homestead plan where it takes into account all the diversity and what you're prepping for. So be certain to come out and look at that. If you like this kind of stuff, this homesteading, do-it-yourself kind of stuff, be certain to come on out to our channel and subscribe. If you hit the little bell, it will notify you when we upload videos. We upload videos every Sunday, sometimes 1, sometimes 5. It just depends on what's going on in the homestead that week. So now, with that being said, it's time for me to get on to the next thing.